As we think about some of the kind of the key themes in the book of Proverbs, if you just kind of read it straight through, there's a recurring theme that really almost happens in every chapter. And it's really this power and the responsibility of our words. As we look about our tongues and the power that harnesses it, it has the power to build up, but it also has the power to tear down. We have the power to heal through our words, but equally we have the power to wound others. We have the ability to speak truth and to spread God's word, but equally we have the power to spread lies. You think of the kind of the adage of sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Found another ending to that. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will infect our minds. Truthfully, do we think about the power that our words have? The power for harm, the power for good. Proverbs 18 and verse 21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits." We're in a moment in time, and maybe this is always there, but we seemingly are in a moment in time where we're constantly confronted with chaos. One of my early managers would explain, as we think about a person's ability to either do their job or to be their capabilities or their capacity to get something done is a finite amount. And if you're constantly filled up with noise and confusion and just distractions that really makes no progress to your ultimate goal, your capacity to do good or do your job shrinks. So his example, though, as managers of people and things like that, our job is to kind of strip away and get rid of the noise and interference to allow people to do their maximum capacity. But today we're confronted with waves of chaos. We've got the news, right? We've got this medical issue is going on, or this political or economic, or this military thing is happening here, and that's going to impact this cultural thing, this political thing. And in all of those worlds of chaos and interference, we're constantly asked to choose a side, to pick. And as we think about how we might use our words, 20 years ago, it was me talking to Ryan. And I can be very choiceful and mindful of that, and I have facial context and clues. But today we live in a world of Facebook and Twitter, where likes and comments are without that level of context. The other thing is we can spread that choice, that comment, that statement far and wide without anything more than just a click of a mouse. Without the aid of context, without the aid of understanding of what a person may actually mean in their statement, we sometimes then draw those conclusions because we're looking at it on a screen without the ability to see that. But the news media does a great job of fueling that too, right? It's interesting, I saw an article last week, it was like, journalists write the story, but editors write the headlines. And editors are writing the headlines to what? Get the clicks. Because clicks equals dollars equals success for them. Here's a quote. Although positive words were slightly more prevalent than negative words, we found that negative words in news headlines increased consumption rates and positive words decreased consumption rates. For a headline of average length, each additional negative word increased the click-through rate by 2.3%. So how does that impact us? Maria?
There's a biochemical, I know this is a biblical class, we're here to talk about the Lord and His Word, but there's a biochemical response in your brain to like what you just said. Positive words versus negative words, and they know that. And I think there's an old saying that Mark Twain said it, that truth is barely has a chance to get its pants on before a lie has already made its way halfway around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, evil spreads, and the devil knows that.
Any other thoughts how some of this may influence us?
You said that these negative words and titles are drawing you to click on it, and that happens, right? We do that. And what effect does it have on me? Well, just seeing it all around us, and that's the way we see communication happen. It's easy to find myself saying things just for a reaction, right? Without giving thought about how it's going to affect the person I'm saying it to. And that's a danger.
Yeah. Maria?
But, the other side of that, and thankfully so, is like right here, this verse you have on the screen, God has told us, has warned us, what words can do, that there's life and death, depending on which words you choose. And if you think about God put into existence through speaking the world into existence. I mean, if you think about how powerful that is, and what God has really equipped us with, not that we're gods or we're even many gods or anything like that, but we were created in His image. And if there is that much power in words, think of all the good that can be done if we will just speak godly words,
Yeah.
positive words, the right words that are pleasing to the Lord, to ourselves and to each other.
I think we need to guard ourselves, right? Because from this negative influence is not going to stop. But do we understand the psychological impact that it may have? I mean, we sometimes we just then almost repeat, maybe not the same words and the phrases and stuff like that, but just the mindset and the black and white when things are not black and white sometimes aspects of this. So today we're gonna look at some of the positive impacts, but we're also gonna look at the negative aspects of our speech. Ultimately, we need to figure out how can we use our words to honor God and positively impact our lives, but really the lives of others around us. So we're going to kind of start off a little bit on the negative side, but ultimately want to end with a positive. As I was gone all this week traveling, just a quick update. Our Eden factory, we were supposed to be starting up next week. We'll now be starting somewhere in the middle of February. So speaking of words and challenging situations to be in, the vice president of operations was on the trip with us, and there was a lot of challenge that came up in all of those kind of meetings that we had. But I kind of had put this one already to bed, and I was like, all right, this thing, all I need to do is just kind of work a little bit on the flow. I told Jessica yesterday morning, that's just a few minutes, and as long as I don't restart and think about the whole thing all over again, but I kind of restarted and thought about the whole thing over again because I didn't want to end up with just a bunch of negative stuff. Well, I also thought about too, some of the negative things we can get very just drilled in, and I'm going to actually turn in your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 6, beginning verse 12. Good, I think that's, you can read that pretty well. We can really just hone in on really these kind of big, kind of key things that are negative, like don't lie, don't slander, don't do all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, yes, I got that. That's probably not what we really need to be thinking, and this are not our biggest challenge for us today in this room. Certainly in the rest of the world, those are big challenges, but I think we need to kind of strip down and look a little bit deeper. So Proverbs chapter 6, beginning in verse 12, says, a worthless person, a wicked man, goes with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, and points with his finger. With perverted heart devises evil continually, sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly, and the moment he will be broken beyond healing. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. As we look at that passage, how many of those are because of what we say, what we don't say? Let's see if this shows up. It'd be a little hard to read. But of those things that lists out the things that God hates, 4 of the 7 are something to do with our mouth, or how we're using our mouth, or how we're using our communication. I think that's something that as I started to look at this, it may be not something I say, but it may be how I say it. It may not be, the words are not wrong, but it's how I say the words, or when I say the words, or the context around those things.
The beginning section points to a person who is not outwardly, standing up, giving a stump speech where it's plain out in the open, easy to identify. This person is sneaky. This person is being intentionally sly and deceptive with what they're doing, the winking of an eye, signaling. That is someone who's working in the shadows, and yet God still sees it and calls that out as being crooked speech.
Yeah, thank you. So we think of those things that are listed there, the ones that God hates. The last one is probably the most painful. So how does gossip and spreading strife damage relationships? Turn over to Proverbs chapter 16. Proverbs 16, verse 28 says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. As we think about those things, right? Gossip and spreading strife are those things that infect people, right? Kind of go back to the last one, right? They get between friends. They break down those relationships that we should have. they plant seeds of doubt, seeds of why would they say that? So how do we counteract those things?
I don't know counteracting, but I think sometimes the ones that are closest to us, that's when it hurts the most. Because they're not the ones who are supposed to be hurting us. You know, someone on the interstate cuts me off. Okay, I'm probably never gonna see them
Right.
again. But someone, you know, if Becky came up to me and said something, that's gonna kind of like sit there and fester, because you wonder, why would she do that? Why would she, and then it's, well, what did I do? What, was I really in the wrong? And I mean, there's times when we need to correct ourselves, definitely, and need to be corrected by others, but, like you said, how you've spoken to the things that are brought up, when it happens between two close people, and especially something that's not true, it's a deep wound.
I also don't have an answer to your question yet. I've heard the phrase sowing discord for a long time, but now I'm just thinking about the idea of sowing discord. When you sow is when you plant, right? It's when you're planting. And so it's not like you're creating the discord. It's that you're planting the seeds for it, and then later those seeds that you plant will grow into something, and so there is some amount of, I didn't do that. No, but you planted the seed.
Yeah, and I think as you look at many of these passages, it's it may not be what you say, but it's also kind of this aspect of like kind of like fueling the fire. There's a little spark, and like just if I fan that a little bit, is that, and in many of these ways, it's hard. So sometimes it's like the unintended consequences, I think, is the hard part, right? I think sometimes we think about, well, I'm speaking the truth. Again, am I saying the right words, but not the right way at the right time? We'll get to that as we kind of finish up this morning, I hope. If you're going to widen out that passage right there, if you kind of back up to verse 27, the worthless man plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. This creation of strife with the intent of kind of damaging people's character and their integrity. Those are the hardest things that kind of then rebuild, right, and reestablish. Well, I think one of the ways that we should counteract this, if it's surrounding us, turn over to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26, beginning in verse 20, it says, "For the lack of wood, a fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. As charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Like the glaze covering an earthen vessel, the fervent lips with an evil heart." One of the ways I think we can counteract this is just not participating in it, just stopping it. Therefore, lack of wood, the fire goes out. For if there's no one to tell, no one to listen, it stops. But I wish it was that easy. Just like, I don't hear you. Where I found myself in this is like I hear it. I'm not going to repeat it and say it on. But if I don't maybe confront the person saying it, if I just kind of sit on my hands and just don't do anything, I think sometimes we're like, no, stop. What you are telling me, and maybe what you're telling others, you can't let this keep going. I think that's the hard part that as I started putting these things together is, man, it's like how many times have I'm not spreading this, I'm not doing it, but what am I doing to not allow it to be spread? And standing idly by when somebody is just running their mouth and doing things. So how do we counteract that? How do we stand up and have that aspect in our life?
Well, something that triggered in my mind is, First John talks about testing the spirits, and more specifically when it gets into verse 4, you are of God, little children, you have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as the world, and the world hears them. We are of God. He who knows God hears us. He who is not of God does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. So when we hear something that somebody who's trying to sow discord, you're talking to them, asking questions, you sure about this? It's going to be a hard conversation to go to that person that they're talking about. Say, hey, is this going on? What's going on? And the people who are of God will hear the truth, and as we know in the scripture, it says the truth will make us free.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the other thing, this is really talking about things that people are maybe doing to sow discord. But what about those unintended consequences of our words? What about words that just kind of wound or kind of pick at a person? Turn over to Proverbs chapter 26, just kind of backing up. I guess we're already there. Backing up to verse 18. Like a madman who throws firebrands and arrows and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and said, I'm only joking. Chapter 12 and verse 18, I'm going to read out of the NIV. Chapter 12, verse 18 says, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. When you think of reckless words, what do you think that means in this context? What does that look like?
You have no filter. You're not thinking about consequences. You're not thinking about intention.
How can that impact people? Lena?
Even if you apologize for something said in haste, there's still that damage. You're not back to where you were before those words were said. It's like the person who sows strife and the whisperer who separates the best of friends. If someone's accused of something, even if it's not true, that accusation still taints the relationship. So once things are said, there's no going back to the way things were before they were said. There's healing that can happen, but really that's why we need to be patient and slow to speak, because once things are said, they can't be unsaid.
No.
I was thinking of the example that you brought up at the beginning, when if you are reading a headline that may be misrepresentative of the actual article, the chaos that can, pursue after just reading the headline. You're just reading it and scrolling through your news feed. That's your perception of the story, whether or not it's true. That negative influence in the language and whatnot can really cause chaos and panic or anger towards a subject that you're not really fully aware of.
Yeah, I think similar to the passage there, if you have a little bit of a hot ember, it says some charcoal just on top of that instantly lights it on fire. And if we've got relationships that we've just mangled because we're just not cognizant of what words we're using, even if we're unintended consequences, if we've kind of created this zone where it's like one little spark just, I mean, James talks about how large a forest can be burned down by just our small words. So what is that as we look outward, right, from the impact maybe to us internally inside our church family? How does that look like? What does that look like to the world outside?
I think one of the characteristics for elders is that they're supposed to be in good standing with the community, good repute with the community. And so if you're a gentleman and you're known for saying things without thinking, or maybe making some crude jokes that don't land well, and then the next day you try to have spiritual conversations, good luck with that. Why would I believe you? Why would I have that conversation when I know other things come out of your mouth? And it damages our reputation as a church, and it damages God's reputation to
Right.
non-believers.
Yeah. Who's ever heard where somebody's like, why would I ever want to go? They're just a bunch of hypocrites. And right, that level of barrier to those that may be seeking truth, and to repair that is so very difficult. Somebody goes over there. Jess.
I was just gonna say, that was a big part of the study on family that Ryan did with us, we don't wanna hide our flaws necessarily as a group here, but, we want this to be a place that people would want to come and learn about God. And if they're always, you say, oh, someone asks where you go to church, you say, I go to Ellisville Church of Christ, I'm like, oh, I've heard about them. And you're like, that shouldn't be the reputation. It should be the reputation of, oh, you all are really close. You all are really have a good, relationship, blah, blah, blah. And as much as we think that we can keep things within the walls here, that's not true. Just like within a family nucleus, people can see the stiffness of a parent-child relationship. And it's the same with our brothers and sisters here. If we're all together and no one's having a good time, there's something underneath that needs to be dealt
Right.
with. And people can see that.
Yeah. That does not lead to an inviting environment. Any other thoughts on reckless words or unintended consequences? Lisa?
Well, wherever my heart is at the moment, at the beginning of the day, is going to have a massive impact on, even if it's mildly negative or mildly unnecessary, it still shouldn't come out of my mouth. Or I don't want to say something nice to Tim, even when I love him, because I'm not in the mood, I'm just not in the mood. I mean, all that stuff goes together. And unfortunately, we can not make progress unless we look hard at ourselves.
Thank you, Lisa. Good.
For another verse out there, it's Proverbs 17, verse 9. He who conceals his transgression seeks love, but he who repeats matter separates him from friends. If you know somebody did something wrong, you might do something to help them correct it, but you don't spread it to anybody else. And you keep it to yourself.
Yeah. I think too, it's like, too, are we always looking for, we have to be careful in how we use our words, but if we're also like expecting the worst coming towards us is another way. How we receive those words, how we maybe just, and I think that's where the world around us really can influence, and we're always expecting the worst, or it's like, It's funny. We go to Indiana, and Fox News is on in the house, and we're just like, you can just feel your blood pressure just, because all it is just people that are just intentionally just yelling at one another. Nobody seems to be truly right or wrong. It's just noise and chaos. So then, to kind of end us, we got 15, not quite 15 minutes here. Let's flip the other side. So how should we use our tongue? Proverbs 15 verse 4 says, a soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So how can a soothing tongue be like a tree of life? And then consequently, how can a perverse tongue have the power to kind of crush one's spirit? What is it, when you think of somebody with a soothing tongue, what does that mean relative to this? Is it just saying something that's just nice to be nice? Or is that something where you're truly in this like firefighting mode is what I was thinking of, Ryan?
I think of it as something that is deeply comforting or compassionate, maybe even a word of encouragement. I'm sure we can all think of individuals who have encouraged us, and we might have pursued something further, or we might have strengthened our study because we were encouraged to do so. And we can remember the individual and even what they said, where we might have been discouraged by someone, and we never do that thing again because, I got that one bad piece of discouraging advice, so I must be terrible at it. I'll never pursue it.
I think there's a clear distinction being made here, right? This soothing tongue has the ability to bring life and refreshment and health to relationship. And on the flip side, I think somebody that is just crushed beyond repair. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 15. This is from the Message translation. Kind of like the way that this put. Gentle speech breaks down rigid defenses. You think about somebody that maybe is new to the faith. Somebody that maybe is seeking, right? Somebody that maybe is in the world, has a belief in God, but is never really quite. How can our words start to soften their heart even further? Break down their maybe rigid defenses.
I'm in a negotiations class right now, and one of the tactics that was recommended in a book that we had to read was when the other side in the negotiation gets really fired up and they're emotional and they're angry and they're almost maybe yelling, the best thing you can do with them at that point is just agree with them. Like, if I was in your position, I would feel the exact same way, or man, that sounds really hard, thank you for sharing it. In negotiation, which is like tends to be adversarial, that point of agreement or that point of empathy, like, just brings the whole temperature of the room down. It breaks down rigid defenses, I would say, because it's not expected, and it sort of goes to mend that gap and create sort of a level of unity before trying to come to a unified solution in negotiation. I think it's sort of the same way here, which is when you're trying to connect with someone, even if it's someone you disagree with, if you're trying to break down defenses and build that level of unity, just a gentle word or a point of agreement or something you can say that is soft when you might want to say something harsh, it goes a long way there.
Absolutely. The next one there listed there is an offended brother is harder to reach, right? If we continue to challenge them with our speech, we're going to continue to kind of build up these walls of defense. Proverbs 13 and verse 3 says, the one who guards his mouth protects his life. And the consequence of the flip side there is like if we just let it all fly, we're ruining those. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 says, the tongue of the wise brings healing. So I started to think about, what does this look like? Where else in scriptures can we see this in action? So turn over to John chapter 8. We're going to hop out of Proverbs for a minute. John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11 is the section where we have this woman who is caught in the very act of adultery. And, right, Jesus knew what was going on. These men that brought her to him were trying to just make a point. The scribes and Pharisees, it says the scribes and Pharisees, verse 3, brought a woman caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say? Challenging Jesus' authority, challenging, like, well, you guys stand up for the law. This is exactly what she did. Jesus, in every right, could have said to this woman, you're guilty. He could have picked up the very first stone out of justice and rightness for the law, enacted it right then. But, verse 6, Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And then continued to ask them. He stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin amongst you throw the first stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Imagine this woman, how scared she was. Very vulnerable. She knew she was guilty too. She knew what should have happened. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus says, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That's the way to use a soothing tongue. Offering this aspect of life. In this case, actual life. Jesus didn't say, well, whatever you did, that's fine. He says, sin no more. Go forward. Sometimes I think it's not only what you say, but when you say it is very impactful. So in our own experiences, how do we have that same mindset in our own lives today? How do we use our words like Jesus did for good instead of stirring up trouble or just recklessly using our words that have the unintended consequences of tearing others down? Proverbs chapter 15, verse 23 says, To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is. I think as we build our relationships with each other, how often, I think another aspect of this is how often do we sometimes want to go and talk and use our words and speak, and when really we should just sit silently and listen. I think that's another lesson that we all need to learn, is the timeliness of our words. Sometimes it may not need to be even spoken at all, but it may just be, just soak it in and be with a person when maybe they need to vent. Maybe they need to just cry out. As Ralph talked about lamenting, we see the impact of, like, Job's friends and his wife weren't really helpful in what they were saying to Job. But if they would have just stood nearby and supported him, maybe without saying a word, how impactful would that have been to him? Jay?
I think about that too on the times when I actually don't say something in a situation where I might have a really great opinion, and then come to find out more, like what you're saying with Joe, like maybe change my mind, and then there's not a conflict then, because maybe I realized, oh, they were right, or just didn't really have a grasp on the whole situation.
Yeah. If we have just a couple more minutes there.
Because sometimes, with me though, things just build up and build up and build up. And sometimes it just feels good to vent, either to Doug or the kids or a good friend, and just get it off my chest, and they'll say, oh, I don't, like, maybe that would hurt too, or, you know, maybe you shouldn't feel that way, maybe they didn't mean this, but sometimes it's, I don't keep my mouth shut, I just vent, it's simple. I have to try to be careful who I vent to.
That is, but I think as we build relationships with one another, I think that there needs to be the kind of safe space too to, like, be able to just, like, talk it out. But knowing that it's not intended to, like, all right, I'm not ready to, like, full on blast somebody, but I just need to talk. I need to talk through. And maybe sometimes what we can say is like maybe as we're venting and stuff like that, and it's like in our own mind we have how it is going and how it came across to us, but maybe that's not. Maybe we're wrong, and maybe some of those people can help us correct and help us have a wider understanding of what's going on. Yeah.
This isn't to go against what you just said, but, you know, sometimes I think we need to also make sure we're taking it to the Lord first. And I guess I would go back to what Ralph was talking about when he did his lesson on lamenting, is that a lot of times I think we would save ourselves a lot of trouble if we did vent. And don't get me wrong, you can ask my sisters, ask my family, I am one of the first ones to just want to, I have all kinds of opinions and things to say and want to be heard. But, you know, a lot of times we'd be better off if we just took it to the Lord, even if that's just locking the door and literally, physically crying out to Him, if that's what it takes, throwing a fit,
Let me close this out with one last passage here. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 27. Whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he's deemed intelligent. As you think about our tongue, oftentimes the best thing we can do is just not. We have to think about our words. We have to use them for good. But understand that we might not always have the right context and understanding of what that other person may be going through. We're a couple minutes over. I appreciate everybody's comments this morning.